You are now.
Good evening. I'm Cindy Segata Jones. I'm the superintendent of Glendale Elementary School District. Thank you for coming this evening. We know that it's never easy to have conversations about possible closures or repurposing of schools, but we want to share with you that information and let you know that it is our responsibility not only to provide the best education for your students, but also to be, as an organization, fiscally solvent and responsible. So that's where we are today to have that conversation. And we're going to go over a presentation with you, then we'll take time to answer questions. Let me introduce some people that are here with us this evening. I would like to introduce the board president, Brenda Bartels. Board member, Marianne Wilson. And then coming over this way, board member, Monica Pimentel. And then to my left is Dr. Jerry Peterson in Provida. He is Assistant Superintendent for Educational Services. To my right is Mr. Mike Berrigan. He is Assistant Superintendent for Finance and Auxiliary Services. To his right is Dr. Louis Lafitte, and he is an Assistant Superintendent for Behavior and Student Services. And then to his right is Ms. Debbie Valadez, and she's Assistant Superintendent for Human Resources. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and begin the presentation, and Mr. Berrigan will begin that for us. Thank you.
Well, good evening. We're going to talk a little bit about the rationale and the reasons for making the recommendations to the governing board. The strategic goal here is that the district will ensure financial solvency by providing the community a multi-year process of school closures, reorganizing boundaries, and repurposing schools by June 2021. The dates that you see listed on that screen are the dates in which the administration has presented to the governing board, whether in a study session or just in a regular board meeting, the need to move in this direction. And so there's been a lot of conversation about what that enrollment projection is in future years, and we're going to touch on that in a little bit more detail here in just a second. That rationale for phase 1 and phase 2 includes the declining enrollment, population density, the life of the facility, program changes, and statutory requirements. What we want to address here tonight is misconception about the decrease in enrollment. We projected that our enrollment throughout the district would decrease over the next 10 years, pre-pandemic. More specifically, in December of 2016, that's when we first saw the decline in enrollment. And that was when we first notified the board of that decrease. The Arizona School Facilities Board, which is a state agency, and they're responsible for overseeing some of those school district facilities, in 2017 through 2020, they listed our school district as being part of the top 10 school districts that have lost what we call, a technical term, average daily membership. And what that means is we're losing students from one year to the next. The Auditor General, which is a state agency as well, as recently as yesterday morning, in a classroom dollars report, categorized the district as decreasing in enrollment, specifically at 16%. And then you can just see in those prior years, in 2019, 2018, and in 2017, they had a different term, different category, but the point of that is to illustrate that we've been decreasing. There's a link, and I would encourage you to look at it, to click on it, to type it in when you get home. And it's going to provide you additional information. And in about December of 2020, the Auditor General's Office put together this financial stress assessment document. And they actually list the district as being one of the top school districts in the state who has lost enrollment. So I would encourage you to look at it. What we've done historically, currently, is we've hired an outside firm to look at and analyze our demographics. What type of residential construction might be occurring, commercial development, growth within the district. They do a very comprehensive analysis, and they let us know what they believe that enrollment projection is over the next decade. The district's been working with Applied Economics, and when we met with them, I think it was either November or December, they pointed out that our enrollment from 95-96 school year was greater slightly than where we are today. And at that time, we had 12 schools. So I know that we've had a lot of staff members who have been here since the 80s and 90s, and some community members who've been involved with the district. And so I would just ask, remember what it was like in 95-96 with the enrollment that we had, and then compare that to today, and now we have 17 schools. This slide is enrollment, and so I'm going to try to, without overcomplicating it, try to walk you through what that means versus what we call average daily membership, and it's a technical term that folks in my position use on a daily basis. And the easiest or best example that I can give you is this. Think of your child's class, specifically kindergarten. That's a good one. If you have, for the sake of this example, say 20 kids in a classroom, when I see the report on my end, and because the way that the state functions and operates and pays school districts, I only see 10 kids. So you might have heard, I think it started in 2008, 2009, where if there were 20 kids, the state would pay you for 20 kids. And then I think it was about 2008 through 2010, sometime between there, they stopped funding all kindergartners by half. So for every kid, you're getting a 0.5. Or in the example that I gave you, if you have 20 kids, we're only getting funding for 10. So just please know that while you might see more kids, it doesn't necessarily always translate, and there's other examples of why you may not see the funding be equal to the number of bodies that you see in a classroom. But this slide in particular is, I think, a very telling one. If you look at where the enrollment was in 2001, and it did increase, and then obviously in 2008, 2009, the recession and everything kind of tanked. And you can kind of just see the district went down, and then it began to increase again in 2013. So the data between 2001 to 2020 is really data information that you could get from the Department of Education. And there's this term that I've used, and it's a quote that is not mine, but trust and verify. What you hear today, one, we're going to provide you with the resource or a document that validates what we're telling you here today. But I would encourage you to independently go to the Department of Education's website and just double check everything that we're telling you. And so, we talked about, we hired a company to tell us what those demographics might be, what that enrollment might be over the next decade. And so we've known that we're declining. And so in the 2020 school year, our 100th day, and again, that's the number of kids that we're getting paid on, we had 10,813, and we knew that we were going to decrease by 3%. So the prudent, responsible thing to do is, you know that you're going to lose kids, so you reduce your budget accordingly. And so based on that, we projected for this year, pre-pandemic, that our enrollment or the funding that we would be receiving would be about 10,500 students. And then, that thing that requires us to wear the mask happened, right? And so what that meant was, you can see the decrease in the 40th day, which is a time in which the state looks at our enrollment and kind of calculates what our funding might be. And then they do that again the 100th day. And you can just see, while we budgeted for 10,500 kids, we're actually getting funded on 8,339. The figures from 2022 through 2029 is the projected enrollment or the number of kids that we were going to get paid on pre-pandemic. Okay? So why this slide is important is that everything between 2022 and 2029, based on the data that we're seeing, at least it's my belief that you're going to see those numbers actually lower. And only next year will be more telling. But you can see that there's just a decline pre-pandemic, and it's pretty consistent one year after the next. The rationale for phase 1, phase 2, for the schools that you might have heard us talk about, what's in your documents that were handed out to you today, we can't look in planning just for the next year. We really have to be looking towards the future in subsequent years. And so I would encourage you, this information is already available on our website. There are many resources that address a lot of the misconceptions that you might have heard lately, and we're going to go through those. But you can see, even if you take the far left column, the 2013-2014 of 13,573, and just go all the way to 28-29, and again, this is pre-pandemic data, is that we would lose or we would decrease by 9,542, or to that level. So look at a school. If it's blue or the darker the blue, it indicates that you're actually losing more enrollment. Ironically, the red is actually a good thing in the sense that it shows that the numbers, enrollment, the projection is actually better. So when you look at phase 1, you look at IMES, you look at SIGN, and the question is, well, why IMES or why a SIGN? And if you look at IMES, you can see that in 2014, they were at 542, but they're projected to decrease to 388. SIGN, same thing. While enrollment, or the projected enrollment, is not the only factor, because the life of the building, the location, program changes, that was one factor that was taken into consideration. And so what I want to make sure that you understand is that the information and the recommendation that's before the governing board is data-driven. We have to make decisions, or at least make recommendations to the governing board based on the information that we have and based on data. It would be irresponsible to make decisions not based on data. Enrollment by grade, and the reason that this one's important is, we talked about the applied economics, which was that report that we do on an annual basis, and they tell us what they believe our enrollment's going to be like, the demographics within the district. And so in 2008, 2009, when the recession hit, and what's historically has happened when there's a recession is that birth rates decrease. People aren't having kids when there's a recession. And so the question becomes, well, why is that an important piece of information? Because what happens is you start to lose enrollment, and then you understand or get to see how that enrollment impacts, K through 3, and then eventually it catches up to that 4 through 8. Right? It becomes like a domino effect. Right? So if you have less kids in one year, you're going to have less in the subsequent year and every year thereafter. So you can see on the bottom right, the K2 is in purple, K3 through 5 is blue, and 6 through 8 is red. That is one piece of information that was used, to make the recommendation to reconfigure from a K3 4A to K8. So the demographic study said birth rates are low. That's over time going to hurt any school district that it's in that situation. Secondly, just competition. And so we believe, one, that Glendale is the better choice. Second, if it's not a Glendale Elementary School District student or school, we want those kids to come here. We do believe that's the better choice. And then the third piece is, and this is something that we've said, I know the superintendent has mentioned this, and we have mentioned this, is that affordable housing is becoming a problem within our district boundaries. Ironically, on Thursday's Glendale Star, there was this headline. It's more difficult to get affordable housing. Either you have to move far west, I think they talked about going to Casa Grande, the southwest part of Phoenix, to try to get some affordable housing. Last week, we had a public hearing. It was an opportunity for the community to voice its opinion, its concerns to the governing board. And there was misinformation from the public. And one of the things that was said was, don't do this because we're building, or there's a developer that's building 1,000 homes. Well, that might be the case, but it's not in our school district. And even if it was, and I'm going to go back for just a second. The district would have to grow from, even if you said the 10,248, it would have to grow by about 2,600 students and maintain that level of enrollment for the next decade for this proposal not to occur. This document here, this slide, is a very simplified illustration of the financial challenges that we're facing in this current year. So 10,500 is what we built the budget on, but we're only getting paid for 8,339. So that's a difference of, I'm just going to round it up to 2,200 students. Percentage, that's almost a 21% difference. When you look at the revenue that's being lost because of it, you're looking at about $14.3 million, or I'm rounding up 23%. And that's pretty significant. People have made a comment, and we've addressed this even before public comment. One way that we can balance this year's budget is by using those federal dollars that are being made available. You see the $1.9 million there. We actually received, or will be receiving, about 4.6, but 1.9 would be used to offset this deficit. The difference was used, all those PPEs that you might have seen or you might have heard, also in preparation for doing the distance learning, the geo-learning, whether that was software, whether that was equipment, Chromebooks, whatever the case may be, Wi-Fi hotspots. We made hotspots available to our families. And then there's that $3.3 million figure. We received about $4,025,000. A good portion of that's being used to offset the deficit. The difference is being used for some insurance, liability insurance. And in about December, the previous administration and Congress made additional federal dollars available to public schools. We're looking at about 19.8 million. And so of that 19.8 million, we'd be using about 9.1 of it in this year to offset that deficit. So that would be leaving $11+ million available for next year. You know that term, trust but verify? This document is an independent document, report. It's really 3 pages long, but we wanted to show you, just give you a snapshot of that. And you heard us, or you heard me talk about there's a shortfall of $14.3 million. At the time of this report, the Department of Ed just slightly under 14 million, about $200,000 to $300,000 difference, but pretty close. So again, don't take our word for it. Go to the Department of Education's website, look for the Budget 25 report, and you'll see it there. So trust but verify. This is the same document. Our translator interpreter just made this available in Spanish. It's really the same document, but in Spanish. What we want to make sure that you are also aware of is that on a monthly basis, the dollar amount changes. And the closer that you get to the end of the school year, the more refined or more accurate that number becomes. But the reason for this is that we need to have an understanding of what our financial challenges are in the next year. And so this is our projection. Overall, it's going to be about $18.1 million. The $11+ million that I talked about that would have been left over would be used to address this deficit. So if anyone asks, what's the deficit for the district in the next year? It's $18.1 million. There's information or comments that have been made. We don't know what the deficit is for next year. One, we've always made that known. It's on the website. I would encourage you to look at the frequently asked questions. Capital needs plan. The reason this slide is important is to demonstrate the need of the district. There's also been misconception about, you have bond dollars. We approved a $35 million in November of 2018. The law does not allow any school district to use bond dollars to offset what we call its day-to-day operations. So salary and benefits. You can't use that money to pay for utilities. Bond dollars have to be used for capital-related expenses, renovations, new construction, equipment, AC units, heaters, boilers. You know, those things that you really don't see that allow a school to function is what those bond dollars can be used. And you can just see, I know that the slide itself is very small, but it's also an indication of what the need is. And so what we try to do just on the top right is give you an idea of what that need is. How many, show of hands, how many of you are aware that the district is suing the state and is a leading plaintiff in a capital lawsuit? Show of hands. I believe that lawsuit started in about May of 2016 because funding has been inadequate. I can assure you that the district is advocating on your students' behalf consistently.
What you see in front of you is the proposed of phase one. In order to meet the deficit that we're faced with, as Mr. Berrigan said, we're proposing possible closures and repurposing of schools, and to do that in 2 phases. So phase one, you see the proposed closure of IMES and SIGN. IMES students are reassigned to Burton, Landmark, and Smith, and then SIGN students are reassigned to Burton and Horizon. The proposed boundary changes are American, Landmark, Horizon, Burton students are reassigned based on the proposed boundary grids. Desert Spirit will assume additional students, Smith will assume additional students, and Sunset Vista will no longer have students east of Grand Avenue. When we were looking at what it looked to do to change the boundaries, it was important to us to keep the grand divides the district, so we keep students on the east side and we keep students on the west side, and that would help us to run more efficiently in our mind with the transportation routes, and then we wouldn't be crossing Grand. So that was taken into consideration. When we look at the next slide, the proposal would go to a phase 2. And this phase 2 proposed closure would be Coyote Ridge, Desert Garden, and Bicentennial North. Coyote Ridge students are reassigned to Discovery, and Coyote Ridge becomes repurposed. Desert Garden students are reassigned to Challenger or Minzadick and are reconfigured to K-8 models. Currently in the district, we have K3, 4-8, and K-8 models. With phase 2, that moves all schools to a K-8 model. Can I go back to that one? And then Desert Garden is repurposed. Bicentennial North students are reassigned to South or Menzendick, and Bicentennial South is reconfigured also to a K-8 model. Next one. With phase 2, the proposed boundary changes. Students are reassigned based on the proposed boundary grid. Jack is reconfigured. It's currently a K3. It becomes a K8, and Menzendick is reconfigured to a K8. Those schools are located on 67th Avenue and Maryland, near Maryland. And what you see with those two schools is you'll think, well, why are we putting on that property? Because they sit on the same property, two K-8 schools. Back to what Mr. Berrigan said was, in the demographic studies, we looked at now and in the next 10 years, where would we see the most student population? They will be at Jack Men's area as well as the Smith area. That's where we see the most of our student populations to be. And so that's why there is a necessity to have two K-8s on that property. Here, we'll get into the boundaries, and I'll let Mr. Berrigan talk a little bit about the grids and what that means perhaps for some of your students as well.
This slide here is currently the grid. So, for example, if you live here, you currently would be attending IMES. You can see the proposed changes that the governing board will take into consideration on March 11th. One of the things that was also taken into consideration with this boundary change, proposed change, was we have currently students that live here. This is Grand, that we bus to IMES. We have students that live east of Grand that get bused to Sunset Vista. So the recommendation is really to kind of keep the kids that live west of Grand on the west side of the district. Students that live east of Grand remain on the east side of Grand. It improves efficiencies, and it just minimizes that back and forth from picking up kids from either the east to the west or vice versa. And mainly students that live on the east is where you see the biggest, I think, change, but also you do have kids that in the proposal would be going to Smith. This is the same map, it just looks a little bit differently. So in phase 1, you can kind of just see the outline, and then phase 2 on the bottom left. One of the things that we have heard is if you move forward, or if the governing board moves forward with this proposal, well, is that going to increase the school's capacity, my child's class size? And so we wanted to address that. We wanted to give you an idea of what that would mean. And on the left-hand side is the school's capacity, the capacity of what it would look like in phase 1, and then what the capacity could look like in phase 2. And you can see that there's space, but let me also point out that the information that went into this, we have, I think we're about 1,980 students or so that attend GEO. GEO is the online, there's an online instruction program that we made available this year. For the purpose of this analysis and to give you, the parents, the community assurance that those students are factored in. We know that not all of them will want to remain in the traditional brick and mortar setting. So this is, we believe, a very conservative projection of what it could be. I believe it will be lower than this, but this would be like a worst case scenario. And if space were to become an issue, we would address that. That was one of the reasons that we decided to make the recommendation into phase 1 and phase 2. So if you're in phase 2, it allows us to plan for that subsequent school year and make the accommodations that are necessary. So if you're going from a K3 to a 4-8 and you're in that 4-8 setting, then we're able to reconfigure the school site to accommodate your children and vice versa. Again, the question about what will my child's class size look like? This is the average. It is the average by grade level. But let me also point out this statistic, and Ms. Valdez, if I misquoted, please correct me. This year, 95% of our classrooms are either at or below the standard. If you look at last year, pre-pandemic, 80% of class sizes were either at the standard or below. So please take that into consideration as you're, asking those questions and wondering whether your child's class will be crowded, because that's what we keep hearing. We don't believe that to be the case. I can tell you that every Tuesday morning, pre-pandemic, before, we've always done this. Every Tuesday, Ms. Valadez and her team provide the superintendent and the cabinet level members with a report, and we look at class sizes on a weekly basis.
I just want to make sure we're clear what we're looking at on this particular slide. So Mr. Berrigan talked about the class standards, and we do have class standards, and you'll see that up at the top. And I'm going to just choose 7th grade to look at here. The standard classroom size for 7th grade is 32 across the district. What this is showing you is that this year, the number of students ranging from 19 to 24, there are 11 classrooms that have that many students in it. And then the number of students that range from 25 to 30, we have 23 classrooms with that capacity, and then 31 to 32, there are 3 classrooms, and then 33 plus, there are 2 sitting right now. So if they are sitting at the standard, some of them, when they, as Mr. Berrigan said, when we see classrooms that go above that standard, then we make those adjustments. But I want you to understand that this is not what it's looking like for next year necessarily. It's just showing you where we are currently today with how many students at each of those grade levels. And then above, it tells you what the current standard should be for every grade level.
The recommendation before the governing board for the 22-23 school year, currently tuition-based preschool occurs throughout the district, but a centralized location will allow for efficiencies in physical and staff resources. We're proposing a wraparound services, again, centralizing that. One location for the district's preschool, partnership with Head Start, pre-K workshops, child find screenings, first thing first classes for parents and children, preschool kindergarten transition, meetings occur in a centralized location, and then again, the central location for district-wide kindergarten registration.
Also with this, we want you to understand with the preschool programs that we offer, we have them throughout the district at certain sites depending on the space. With this phase 2 approach, we have then identified the facility as Desert Garden. It is based on the location, the space, the campus layout, organization, and physical aspect of a campus for primary years. With that, we would also, is our hope, to expand our partnerships with Head Start. Most of our preschools are funded through grants, so we would want to expand those if possible, but also to open a community preschool, and those are for Head Start, as you know, or may not know, I apologize, is based, you qualify. Most of our preschools, you have to do a qualification for that. With our community preschools, which we do have some classes, you do not have to qualify for that in the sense of the financial aspect. You would be eligible as to attend those based on the requirements set by community preschool.
Dr. Lafitte, we're going to defer to you on this one. Have you take the lead on the Systems of Care Central Framework? We didn't tell him he was going to speak tonight, so there you go.
Yeah, that one's So, one of the other pieces that we're looking at when we talk about repurposing schools, we're looking at Coyote Ridge Elementary School. And we want to create what's called a Systems of Care Center. And what that is really a center that takes, what it does is it takes the mental health, the physical health, nutritional health of everyone in mind, from students to parents, community members, all across the district boundaries, to say how can we support them in that area. So it was based on us looking at several needs. Those needs were to develop health programs that really are staffed by health professionals. So individuals who are professionals in those areas who can provide those supports. Also to increase health awareness and literacy for students. One thing that we've been really working on, and Superintendent Sagata Jones has done a great job of promoting this, especially with the board support, is our social emotional learning. What does that look like for our students and our community? So that's something that we really want to focus on and create an entire system that supports that. So why that was selected, for several reasons. One, when you think about Coyote Ridge School, the location of it. Most of our other schools are nestled within a community. But Coyote Ridge School is on a main thoroughfare and actually has public transportation near it. There's bus stops across the street and right next to the school. Also, the spacing of it, the layout of the campus, and just that ease of access. And I think that is it. So we'll go ahead and give it to Superintendent.
Thank you, Dr. Lafitte. So with that, we're going to take questions. We've asked that you write your questions on the cards. If we have some up here, let me grab those. If you have questions now that you've seen the presentation, would you please jot those questions down and get them over to Liz? And if you'll give us a minute, we'll answer those questions. If it's a duplicate question, we'll just read the question and answer it the one time. But if you can take a moment to do that, and then we'll go ahead. Also, you should have with you passed out the frequently asked questions. And so if there's a question that has been asked this evening that we haven't been brought before us prior, then we will make sure that gets posted on the frequently asked questions too, and you can go to the link on the website to find those. So let me, if you give me a minute, let me get the questions and we'll go forward.
We're doing it outside. Yeah, Chris, you have to come to do that.
Because we should have right to be. I can take, we can take, let him introduce himself, and then we'll take the Spanish question. You can, yeah, I guess it doesn't really matter. You can read them in both languages. And then look at them.
When you answer, I'll put my head back down.
Por favor, ¿hay más preguntas o no? Alex, ¿hay más? ¿No está? If it's the same question, we've already answered the same question. All right, so you want to start?
One of the questions that someone turned in is, what would happen to the teachers that work here? Will they be out of a job? ¿Qué pasará con los maestros que trabajan aquí? Se quedarán sin empleo. Voy a traducir para aquellos padres que hablan español, ¿me pueden oír?
Good evening. No, our plan would be for any teachers, we do not foresee any teachers being out of a job due to normal attrition in the school district. In the past couple of years I've been in the district, we've hired anywhere from 100 to 140 teachers each year, so we do not see that as being an issue.
Pasarían a las nuevas plazas. Those of us that have children at Challenger and Desert Garden, and those that leave Desert Garden, third grade, will they have priority going to Challenger? Porque tenemos hijos en la escuela Challenger y en Desert Garden, a los que salgan de Desert Garden les darán prioridad a ir a la Challenger.
Yes, they will. Challenger is their assignment.
Sí, la escuela Challenger es la escuela que se les ha asignado a asistir. ¿Por qué piensan cerrar la escuela? Why are you thinking of closing the school?
I'm going to do it, respond in English, and then Enrique can translate that. There's a lack of enrollment. So when there are not enough students, the prudent thing is to downsize. It was roughly in about 2006, if I remember correctly, the state legislature passed a law that basically said this, and it's been revised, but this is where we're at. If a school district grossly mismanages its finances, it will be taken over by the state. That receiver gets to make unilateral decisions It removes the authority from the governing board and the administration. We believe that decisions should be left with local control. And when we say local control,
Cuando decimos distrito, el control local,
that's a direct reference to the governing board, who you've
una
elected
referencia directa a la junta directiva que ustedes han elegido,
to represent you,
que represente sus intereses.
versus
Versus
a state bureaucrat who doesn't understand the community.
un burócrata del Estado que quizás no entienda o comprenda lo que sucede en la comunidad. How would enrollment be for the kids assigned to the new schools? Will it be sort of lottery or we can choose? ¿Cómo va a ser la inscripción de los niños a nuevas escuelas? ¿Les van a sortear o nosotros podemos escoger?
You will, the school that your attendance areas that you're assigned to, you will just enroll into that school. There will not be a lottery. If you would like to, for example, if you're assigned to go to Challenger and you would not want to go to Challenger, then we do already have in place open enrollment, and then you would follow open enrollment.
Simplemente llenar el formulario y entregar. How will transportation be provided? And when will the date for the first phase and the second phase? ¿Cómo va a ser el transporte escolar? Fecha para iniciar la primera y fase de la segunda.
So those going, transportation for those going to Challenger, there is not transportation, it does not fall within that radius. So you would still remain as a walking school. What was the second part of the question? Oh, the date for phase 2? So phase 1, we are currently in school year 2021. Phase 1 is 21, 22, which is next year. Next year, Desert Garden remains as Desert Garden. 22, 23 is when the change takes place.
Entonces, el próximo ciclo escolar sería las escuelas Saint-Anne, y el ciclo escolar 22-23 sería para el ciclo escolar que incluye Desert Garden, Little Ridge y Barcelona. How can we exactly know what school my child will be going to? Currently, I have a daughter that attends Challenger. ¿Cómo podemos saber exactamente dónde estará inscrito mi estudiante? Actualmente tengo una hija que asiste a la escuela Challenger.
How do I determine what school my child or children might be attending and what would be phase 2 for you and your families? I would encourage you to go to the district's website, gsd40.org. And on the left-hand side, you're going to see school closures, repurposing, reconfiguration, something like that. You click on that, and then on the left-hand side, you're going to see all these resources, frequently asked questions, and then there's a link that you can find out where you currently live based on the maps, and then it's going to give you an idea of where your child will be attending in that 22-23 school year. So not this new school year coming, but the following one is where it would be implemented should the board accept that recommendation.
In addition to that, if the board makes the recommendation, then each school office, current school office staff, you will be able to contact them and they will also have that information as well.
Hacer esas propuestas, tomar las decisiones, donde usted puede contactar las oficinas, a los secretarios de las oficinas de sus escuelas y ellos van a tener todo detalladamente para ofrecer a los padres.
In addition to that, we will send a communication to all families where their children would be going via email. So if we have your correct email, you will receive that.
Vamos a mandar un comunicado
donde también los datos se les va a dar a ellos.
I would strongly recommend that you make sure that all your contact information is updated with your
Una vez más,
school.
les recomendamos que todo su contacto, información de contacto esté actualizado, sea corriente, para que la información le llegue ya sea a través de los diferentes medios que usamos.
I'm going to read these two questions. They've been answered, but for the record, I'd like to read them, okay? So if the school closes, by when would it close? We've answered that.
Si la escuela cierra, para las fechas que hemos dicho, ya hemos contestado.
And then then let me go to, do we have enough teachers? And I believe we've answered that.
Tenemos suficientes maestros y parece que hemos contestado también.
And then we had a question. When is all the repurposing of the schools going to begin?
¿Cuándo va a empezar la reutilización de las escuelas?
So if we receive governing board action for approval to repurpose
La
schools,
Junta Directiva aprueba esto.
we would begin with community forums to talk about when those timelines would be, so that we could make those changes from Challenger to a K-8. And then as parents, what would you like to see within that K-8 model? And we would go through what we currently have in a K-8 model, and then we will answer your concerns and take recommendations from you at that time, so that we can help make that transition from a K-3 to a 4.
¿Cómo vamos a hacer los cambios de una escuela de kinder a tercero o una escuela de kinder?
I have two more questions. I do not believe they are regarding school closure. I believe they're regarding the return to school because of the pandemic. So please clarify if I misunderstood.
Regresamos a las escuelas por la pandemia.
Are we solely going to allow students back? So is that question regarding the pandemic?
Regresaron los estudiantes por la pandemia a las escuelas.
Okay, so we are currently, and then I'm gonna add the second question because I'll answer it all at one time. Is it safe to bring students back to class? And I'm assuming that's with the pandemic. We are currently, as we said, making decisions based off Maricopa County metrics.
Estamos usando las decisiones a través de las métricas por el Senado de Maricopa.
Those metrics will come out every Wednesday or Thursday.
Las nuevas información sale por los miércoles y las tardes.
On this Thursday, Maricopa County has changed guidelines for the metrics. Instead of being just red and yellow, there'll be a rainbow of colors.
Las directrices de cómo vamos a las escuelas.
Which indicates with mitigation plans in place,
Con los planes de mitigación ambiental.
schools could begin to open based on what rainbow of colors the specific school district has.
El color indicado, el semáforo que se nos ha dado.
As we look at the metrics and if we had to do the projections, we know that perhaps by the end of the month, it would be a safe return back. We would have to look at that to make sure it holds true, because we can't predict that.
Quizás al final del mes sea seguro de regresar,
But regardless of the metrics,
pero
we are required by
de los meses
Arizona's Department of Education to begin to bring children back for both AZ Merit 2 and Azella testing. And that would begin perhaps the last week in March or first of April, based on those timelines set by the state. So you will be receiving communication from us within probably the next week about what the next steps are of returning to school based on the new guidelines provided by Maricopa County.
Basamos en los nuevos nuevas directrices o directrices por parte de
Are you thinking about the small children? We want them to be safe. They're next to older children. and maybe they get pushed around. A child, first grade versus an eighth grader, this has me really worried. Están pensando los niños pequeños, deseados que estén seguros frente a niños más grandes y volver, y tal vez los puedan empujar. Un niño de primero versus un niño de octavo, estoy muy preocupado.
Thank you. As a parent, I would have that same question. Currently, we have 11 K-8 schools, and so we've addressed those concerns, keeping our students safe, especially our little ones. I understand that. That would be another reason we want to come together and get specifically some of your concerns and be able to explain to you how it runs on a K-8 campus, so that it's always keeping the safety of your little ones in the forefront.
Para los niños a diferentes partes de las escuelas.
What can we do as parents to avoid closing all the schools? ¿Qué se puede hacer como padres para evitar el cierre de las escuelas?
Let's go back to the purpose of closing the schools. It's because of student enrollment. We don't have.
El propósito de las propuestas que han hecho sido de las escuelas es por la falta de estudiantes y el mínimo cupo que tenemos ahorita en cada una de las escuelas que viven en la parte de la presentación.
The low birth rates, low enrollment is really what is causing the low enrollment projections over the next 10 years. And just again, historically, when there is a recession, birth rates decrease. The question also becomes, and the concern that, what impact does COVID-19 have over the next decade? If again, if history tells us anything, when there's a recession, the economy is sluggish, birth rates decrease. So what does that look like over the next 5 years? Would that projection even decline further? And I think that's something that we don't know, but that's something that we're going to be looking and studying even next year again, because we do this study on a yearly basis. And again, I think I pointed that out earlier, that we would have to grow by about 2,600 students overnight, and then be able to maintain that enrollment for the next decade. So that's the challenge, and I don't know that there's anything that we can do to change that trajectory. And again, it's coupled with, affordable housing. So again, we mentioned that, affordable housing, you got to go far west. I think the article said Casa Grande, southwest area potentially, to find affordable housing. So it definitely needs to be a collaboration, not just the school district and the community, but also with policymakers at the local and state level. Because, the way to have a sustainable, in this case, district, there needs to be growth. So it's going to take more than just the district and the community. It's also going to require policymakers to address and attract businesses and affordable housing.
Mr. Berrigan, if I may add to that, when you ask what can you do as a parent, I think one thing that we can do as parents, and we've been doing this at the district for the last several years, is really marketing the wonderful programs that we do have in GSD. We believe GSD is the best district. We will go to the best district in Glendale. And it's what can we do really to market the programs that we offer and continue to offer those strong curriculum programs as well as extracurricular programs. So no matter where you reside in Glendale or within the valley, you would want to come to one of the GSD schools. That's something that we can do, that's something parents can do, because you can be advocates for GSD.
And that's, I think, a great reminder, so I appreciate you reminding us of that. But then also, the district has made attempts to cater by having specialty schools. And so again, trying to make the district more attractive to not only folks that live within the district boundaries, but also, as the superintendent mentioned, and I'm glad you reminded us of that, is making sure that people know that we believe we're the better choice.
I think, as you saw in the proposed repurposing of Desert Garden, preschool is needed across the valley, across the state in Arizona. And if we can offer the best quality preschool programs for those students ready to enter into the preschool system, if we do a really good job, then we'll keep them within GSD regardless of where they're at. And they will continue to go through our schools just because we've captured them at the preschool level. That's why it's important for us to build those partnerships with Head Start and continue our preschool grants so that we can capture kids at age 3 and keep them through 3, 4, and 5. When they're ready to enter kinder, they stay within us, no matter where they reside in Glendale or the Valley, and that they will choose us because we've offered them those first steps. And that's what we are so committed to preschool, as well as the service of care, because we can get services for 0 to 3. And we know that once we build those relationships with the community and our families, that we form those trusting relationships and they'll stay with us. And that's what our goal is to do. Because when you're faced with low birth rate and not having affordable housing, unless we're all going to increase our family size, that's the best options that we have. And we will continue to market and continue to always put the best instructional programs out there for our students so that they will stay with us, and we are committed to that. Thank you so much for coming, taking the time to come. Thank you for choosing GSD. We want you to stay with us. We are the best district in the state. I always stand up and say, I'm the proud and humbled superintendent of GSD. It's my honor to serve you. We will be the best district in the state of Arizona. We believe we offer that. We believe we have the best staff, and we believe we have the best families and students to do that. And we're committed. We are faced with, unfortunately, financial challenges right now, and we will address those only to make us a stronger educational organization. So again, thank you so much. If you have other questions at any time, you can post those on our website. You can contact your school's office. You can contact the district office as well, and we will take those questions and we'll be happy to answer those for you. Again, thank you so much for coming out this evening. We appreciate it.